very first talk show of this Congress, and we are very fortunate to have with us Edward Parvez Baja. He is a well-known Dasturji from Mumbai, and more known to people where I grew up, Farah grew up, lots of us. So we are very honored to have him with us. And he said, give me a very short biodata, so I've made it short, just to introduce you all to him. Edward Parvez Baja is a qualified priest, having undergone his Nawar and Martab in Navsari at a very young age. He is a graduate in physics and mathematics from the Royal Institute of Science in Mumbai, and also holds a postgraduate degree in law, specializing in international law and criminology, and he's a Dasturji. Not bad. He was awarded the gold medal for his master's degree in Avesta Palvi and ancient Iranian languages from Mumbai University. At present, he is a lecturer in Avesta Palvi and ancient Iranian languages at St. Xavier's College in Mumbai, and he's the principal of Sir J.J. Zartostri and Mullah Feroz Madrasas, two of them in Mumbai. He is also a trustee of the Athornan Mandal, which is the apex body of the Zoroastrian clergy. He is also a member of the governing body of the K.R. Kama Oriental Institute, a very prestigious institute in Mumbai, as we all know. Edward Parvez Baja has presented several research papers at national and international congress and seminars on Iranian subjects, and has given numerous talks on religion, history, and Shahnameh in India and abroad. Apart from his scholastic pursuit, Edward Baja is a Pantaki, that is the head priest of Seth B.M. Mevawala Fire Temple in Mumbai. And now listen to this. This fire temple is managed by the Baja family for 6 generations since the enthronement of fire in the year 1851. And that really, big hand to him and the family. And Edward Baja will share his thoughts on this subject across the Arabian Sea. He has agreed to take questions and answers, but I would request, let him finish his talk, and if you have questions and answers, they'll be taken after the talk. This talk will be for about 45 minutes, which will include his talk, question and answers. So be brief in your questions, but please do ask questions, because that's the most interesting part of our presentation, and even the speaker enjoys that. And on behalf of the Congress, please welcome Edward Parvez Baja. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. You had a sumptuous lunch. I think you won't go to, anyway. This is a journey. Now we are on a journey. First of all, let me thank the organizers and the committee members of the 17th North American Zoroastrian Congress for giving me, a priest and a student of Zoroastrian study, an opportunity to share my thoughts with you and interact with you on our journey from our Madar Watan Iran to the land of India and subsequently to other continents of the world. Though my talk is quite lengthy, but I will try to make it short. I will try to skip something so that you can have questions. I bring greetings from the Parsi, Irani, Zoroastrian community from India, and a very, very happy New Year 2015. I begin my talk. My talk is based on across the Arabian Sea, but for the faith and unity. The theme of the Congress is faith and unity. Let me first clarify at the beginning only for my fellow Zoroastrians, Parsi Zoroastrians and Irani Zoroastrians, the word Arabian which is used here is for the Arabian Sea, not any Arabia or any other thing. Why? Because there was a misnomer when I submitted my paper, there was a lot of hullabaloo in the email, and that why is mentioning Arabian Sea. I say it is, I have not mentioned from Hormuz Bandar to Sanjan. It is across the Arabian Sea. Bandar Abbas, earlier it was known as Hormuz Bandar, from the Zoroastrians had an exodus, came to Diu in Kathiawar, in the west coast of Gujarat. So I'll give you a short glimpse of Iran. Where was the land? How, where it was, in what age it was, who were living there in those Iranian plateau. So my talk starts now. The natural geographical position invests the Iranian plateau with a peculiar importance, as it was a bridge through which all movements that ever crossed the great Asiatic continent pass. Situated between the plains of the Euphrates and the Sindhu, Iran was in close association with both the areas in prehistoric and historic times and influenced culture and religions of its neighbors. The ancestors of the ancient Aryans of India and Iran migrated from a common northern place. The tradition of both the countries have given a wealth of details describing these places. According to our religious scripture Avesta, Iran is known as Aryan Vaija, Iran Vaj, which is approximately the northeastern Bactria, which was the first of the 16 kingdoms created by Ahura Mazda and mentioned in our Vanidat scripture. The Vedas and the Puranas, where the Manu mentions that summer and winter seasons were equal. The Aryan Vaija region can be identified as north and the east of Bactria, and the Margian oasis south of the river Zacritis, nowadays Sir Darya river. Now we have got a close connection with these Indian people these Iranians had. However, sometime between 2000 to 1500 BC, these people moved towards the southeast and southwest and seem to have become pastoral, probably due to the changed condition they found in the Iranian plateau. One group moved westward, and the other group, the Persians, went southwestward, and the Iranian plateau, and another group went towards south of India. Before the advent of Zarathustra and the migration to the south, the Aryans, as generally they are accepted, lived for many centuries in the region called Margiana, Bactriana region, and observed some set of social and religious customs and speak common language. They worshipped the great powers created by God. Those early Iranians used to praise sun, the fire, the moon, the water, the wind. They composed hymns to all the shining ones. Shining ones were known as divas. We call it diva. We call it diva. So divas, from there the word came divas, and chanted them during the ceremonials and accompanied by the music. They had full realization of the oneness of God, the one life giver, the Father of us all, who is behind and beyond the phenomenal manifestation. We call it Ahura Mazda, and they used to call Asura, the Lord of life. Before they entered the Iranian subcontinent 1500 BC, the Aryans were in close contact with the ancestors of the Iranians, as also evidenced by the near kinship between the Sanskrit and the Avesta language, which are still surviving. As in the earlier period, the two great groups of Aryans, the Iranian Zoroastrians and the Indo-Aryans, continue to keep close relationship with each other in every sphere of life, political, economic, social, and cultural, through the next 2000 years. The two groups were not strangers to each other. In a way, the settlement of Zoroastrians in India after the 8th century was not a total aliens. The thousands of years of close affinities was the main reason for the acceptance of the Parsis, and that explains the closeness amongst those two communities, societies. They are very much a part of the Indian culture and ethos, quite contrary to what some Western scholars maintain. Since the epic period, there are various references in Iranians and the sacred and the secular literature of the Hindus. The word Parsika is used for the Iranians and the Pahlavas for the Parthians of the Iranians in general. After that epic period, continued settlements of the Zoroastrians Iran took place during the Achaemenian and the later Parthian and the Sasanian period. Trade was the constant factor between both the countries from the immemorial time over the Hindu Kush mountain from Central Asia and from the Silk Route across the seas. Culture, language, art, religion went back and forth making India a repository of the rich cultural exchange and assimilation. The Iranians continued as a distinct group in North India. Before the advent of Zoroastrians at Sanjan, the Zoroastrians were living, Parsis were living in the northern India. That's what it says. The inscriptions, sculptures, architecture, and the political history all attest to the fact that the Iranians lived in India in all periods of history. After ample references in the early sacred and secular sectarian literature, in the later period, we have references from the Greeks, the travelers who have come to us to the positive conclusion that the constant flow of Iranians were there to India. A period of the Achaemenians, the fourth dynasty, was the glorious age in the annals of the history of Iran. The Achaemenians extended their dominion to the borders of India, Afghanistan, and Gandhara. India was included amongst the 20th satrapies under Darius the Great. The Iranian dominion in India continued to the end of the Achaemenid dynasty till 330 BC. After the Achaemenid Empire was overrun by Alexander in 330, a period of confusion reigned and Iran was ravaged by wars between his successors. During this period, political connections with India were lost. From these chaos and confusion arose another empire, which was known as Seleucid dynasty, or a part who revived Iranian culture and redeveloped the Iranian script. Contexts with Iran, India were revived, and the accession of the Arsacid Parthians who came from north was kept. After the sway extending over nearly 5 centuries, they ruled over 5 centuries from 256 BC to 226 AD. The powerful Parthian empire of the Arsacid was supplanted by the third and the final historical dynasty of ancient Iran, that was Sasanian dynasty. Ardashir Babegan, we all know, was the founder who established the great Sasanian house at Ctesiphon in 226 AC. The Sasanian Empire spread far into Central Asia and indirectly through subject states into many other parts of India. But rapid decline of the powerful Sasanian Empire is the hard fact of history. The empire was shaken during the last days of the reign of Khusru I. Intrigue, fraud, internal conflict hastened the decline of the Sasanian Empire. Professor S.G.W. Benjamin mentions, and what he says, in no country attacked by the Mohammedans in the early period of their conquest did they meet a resistance as obstinate and heroic as in Persia. In many instances, chieftains and kings elsewhere submitted to the Arabs and gained security and honor by embracing Islam. But it was Yazdagat, Shahryar, who disdained such a course and struggled with spirit against his destiny to the end. Whilst we cannot but shed tears of sorrow at the permanent loss of the Parsi Empire, it is some solace to reflect that the last occupant of this glorious Sasanian Empire was a worthy, patriotic, and heroic prince. The Sasanian dynasty was on terms of close friendship with Indian rulers, and Iranians were the leading traders both by sea and by land, and they were constant touch with India. The second migration, now that is important, the second migration of the Zoroastrians from Iran to India took place during the 7th and the 8th century after the downfall of the Sasanian Empire by the Arabs. Then it is said in the next para, the large number, it appears from the known records, sought refuge in Kohistan, the mountainous regions of Khorasan in the southeastern part of Iran, and after the defeat and going to the coast of Hormuz, where they were amongst the leading traders. The tradition mentions that they lived in Hormuz Bandar for nearly 100 years and had their religion practiced unmolested and free from all other faith. This is the most probably due to the Ahadname. There is a book called Ahadname, where the Prophet emphatically states that you have to preserve this community. You are not to disturb their practices and preachings. And that's what book is known as Ahadname. But this covenant granted by the Prophet, the right to keep their sacred places and carry on their religious duties, there was also a solemn obligation placed on his followers by the Prophet to carry out these promises or incur a wrath of the Prophet in subsequent punishment in hell. However, what happened subsequently is what you are seeing in this 21st century in Iraq and Syria. That's what happened to our forefathers 1400 years back. However, with the rise of the Abbasid, the Zoroastrians were discriminated against economically and socially. Another factor which may have started the migration was the development of a new capital in Iran, changed to Baghdad, which supplanted the Iranian cities and brought about a restraint on the commercial activities of the Zoroastrians in Iran. Just before 766 AC, the last representative of the Sassanians, the Sepabads, the Ispabads, who were holding the sway in the northern region part of Iran, were conquered by the armies of Caliph Mansur, and they annexed to its Muslim dominion. This brought an end to the uninterrupted existence of the Sasanian state tradition, and with this, the hope of returned back the northern Iranian province to Iran disappeared. It was reported that a large amount of precious stones, diadems, swords studded with precious pearls and stones were looted, and that the women of the royal family were given to the next of kin of the caliph. You may not be aware, the Shia Panth, the Shia followers in Iran, are the product of Yazdaga Shariah's daughter, taken per force in marriage to Mecca, got married there, had an offspring, and then she was thrown back. She came back to Iran, and she died in Iran. And the progeny which came out, that is the Shia sect in Iran. This seems to have signaled the exodus of at least one known group, probably the main group, to India, which may have formed the nucleus of the Sanjan colony soon after this. What we know about Sanjan, that we landed at Sanjan. Not only did this settlement in Sanjan and other coastal areas in Gujarat, such as Khambhat, that is Cambay, and Diu, but it is also evidence from the available that they also settled along the Thane, Chaul, and Kalyan coast in the Konkan region. Konkan was known to the earliest travelers, especially from across the Arabian Sea. Now, Sanjan, where the biggest settlement seems to have taken place, lies in the northwest coast of Konkan Strip, and Sanjan landing is the only event in the Parsi history which is recorded, particularly in Kisse Sanjan. There is a book called Kisse Sanjan, written by a Mobed from Navsari. He was a Sanjana priest known as Bamban Kekobad. In 1600 AC, he wrote a book, Kisse Sanjan. Actually, the real name of the book is Kisse Khorasani, because the last exodus of the last group which came from Persia to India was not from, it was landed at Sanjan, but they were from Khorasan, so he starts that this is Kisse Khorasani, the story of Khorasan. So the traditional date of arrival of the Parsis in India is given as somewhat 772, somewhat I'm saying Hindu New Year. The day 9th of the Shravan Sud, Friday, Parsi year 85 as the Gardi, it was second Bamban Roj, and it was the fourth month, Tir month of 716 AC. The Hindu king Jadi Rana, who granted asylum to the immigrants in India, is known in the Parsi tradition as Jadi Rana. We all know. The high priest of the Parsi appeared before the king, and on behalf of his community, he pledged his words. What he said, Hame Hindustan ra yar bashim. We shall be the friends of India. We will remain loyal to India. Just give us asylum. Just give us some place to reside, stay. The primary purpose of the Arab invasion and conquest of Iran was propagation of Islam. This shows that the invasion and the conquest of Iran and also the other countries were primarily prompted and motivated by religious zeal and the fanatism for propagation of Islam and conversion of non-Arabs, non-Muslim countries to Islam, what you are seeing today. It is well-known fact that generally the Arabs were illiterate when they conquered Iran. But the Iranian Muslims surpassed Arabs not only in arts and general sciences, but also in religious studies and Arab traditions. All important works in Arabic language, in various spheres of arts and science, were written almost entirely by the Iranian converts to Islam. After the conquest of Iran, the Arab conquerors indulged in tribal fury and cold-blooded massacre, in treachery, intrigue, and deception. The Arabs and the Muslim conquerors and their administrators exploited the religion for personal gains and for personal satisfaction. The spirit of enmity, jealousy, and vengeance were rampant. They cruelly persecuted non-Muslims and even non-Arab Muslim subject nations with full force of fury and violence. They sapped the vitals of the helpless people, and they unjustly extorted money from them with selfish, clannish motives and for personal aggrandizement. One may well imagine the condition throughout the centuries of the poor, helpless Parsis who, with dogged determination, clung to their ancient faith, the religion of Zarathustra, and who stubbornly refused to embrace Islam. Zoroastrian religion does not advocate proselytism and forbids intercommunal marriages. Full religious freedom was granted to the non-Zoroastrians who were living in Iran and in the conquered countries in the days of the Persian Empire. As a rule, the Parsi did not contract intercommunal marriages, although there were exceptions to the general rule, always living in respectfully, in amity, and in harmony with non-Zoroastrians. The Parsis have pronounced their strong disapproval for intercommunal marriages. Besides religious considerations, this is absolutely essential, particularly for a very small community like ours as Parsis, if they want to preserve and maintain their identity and their spiritual and physical characteristics. In spite of the hardships, indignities, cruelties, and persecutions extending over about 12 centuries, I'm talking about 12 centuries since after even coming to India, there were Abbasid dynasty, caliphs were there, Safavid dynasty, Qajar dynasty, Tughlaq dynasty. So all these dynasties, they ruled over in Iran in the last 1200 years. In spite of all these hardships, indignities, cruelties, and persecutions extending over about 12 centuries, the Zarathustris of Iran have admirably preserved their Zoroastrian quality, virtue, and character in public life and in private life. During these centuries, the Iranian Zarathustris were cultivators, gardeners, weavers, artisans, masons, laborers, and couriers. In the last century, they were also traders, businessmen, and bankers. But since after coming to India, what happened? The climate of the 20th century has affected the Parsis. The freedom and prosperity have brought about changes in their outlook of life, which are detrimental to the traditions admirably preserved by their forefathers, undaunted by unimaginable hardship, sufferings, and calamities. The Parsis of Iran, India, I'm not talking of only India, Iran, India, as well as the Western world, have been influenced by the climate of the 20th century. They are thinking in terms of individuals, forgetting and neglecting their duty towards religion and community. This changed outlook of life is detrimental to the ancient pious tradition so zealously regarded by our forefathers. For preserving these traditions, the forefathers of the Parsis of Iran endured untold miseries and hardship and underwent disasters, calamities, and catastrophe. And if you have read the book by Professor A.V. William Jackson of the Columbia University, in his book about Iran, he mentions that those Zoroastrians of Iran have sealed their fate with blood. They have sealed their fate. If we are going to live, we will live it in this faith or we will die. For maintaining this pious tradition and to uphold their faith and protect their distinct identity. Why I'm stressing this? Because this Congress is faith and unity is the motto, is the logo of this Congress. The forefathers of the Parsis in India left their country, left everything, left their land, left their property, and set sail across the Arabian Sea and settled in the hospitable land of India. Now I'm talking about that Qisse Sanjan written in 1599. Bamman Kaikobar has written this book. The author of the Qisse Sanjan states, in beginning, there are 438 couplets. Couplets are 2 lines, make 1 couplet in Persian. So there are 434 such couplets. I'll quote some 4 or 5 in Persian. What the author says in the beginning, in the preface, he says, "Now listen to his wonderful tale as told by the priest in ancient writings. It would be impossible to relate the whole story, nor will only amount, nor any amount of paper will suffice it to write. I will, however, select some portions of the story and use one word where 100 words are required." And he further states, "Foreigners occupied the throne of Iran. The country was made desolate and people scattered and enslaved. Some priests and Bedouins who believed in Avesta went into hiding to preserve their faith. They abandoned their homes, their gardens, their palaces, and concealed themselves in the mountainous region of Kohistan, where they remained for more than 100 years. And then he says, tired of the continual harassment and anxious to preserve their religion, the Zoroastrians put their women, why I mention stress the word, Zoroastrians put their women and children in ships and set sail for India, which they reached due, and there they cast anchor and once more found themselves on land." Concluding his kisse, the story he writes, "I have told this story according to what I have heard from the elders and polished it and showed it to my teacher, who added to it many of the roses from his garden. May God grant him long life. In telling this story, I have followed the path of truth." That means he says, I'm not just giving you a fable story, it's a historic truth. It's a historic truth. That's what he mentions. The Kisse Sanjan is a 438 couplets, they are there. I'll just quote 4 or 5 and tell you how it goes. In couplet number 101, it says, in a Persian it says, "Mukam wa jai bak wa khak wa evan hame bagzaste asbair din shan." It says, they all, for the sake of their religion, left their residences, palaces, abodes, gardens, hills, and everything. Then it says, Zabim Jan wa bhair din hame kas garzidan suya Hindustan pas. Being afraid of their lives and for the sake of the religion, all then fled to India. There in couplet number 114 it says, there was a misnomer among the Zoroastrian community and elsewhere by the foreign scholars when the Zoroastrians came to India. They left their women folk there and the males ran and came to India. But couplet number 114 says, "Zan u farzan kisti nisandan basuyahin kisti tundrandan." Meaning they first kept their women folk and the children inside the boat and then the ship sailed the ship towards India. Then 165 couplet says, "Yakindani," when they landed at India, the ruler was astonished to give shelter to this very grandiose community, and he was afraid rather. So he gives assurance to that ruler, local ruler Jari Rana. "Yakindani," please be assured. He says what he says. "Yakindani ke ma yasdan parastim, baraye din ze darbandan betarsim." Know it for certain that we are the worshippers of God, that is Yazdan, and have left unbelievers for the sake of our religion. Then he says further in 431st couplet, "Man in kisse bugoftan anchadidam, zikoftare buzurgan kutsanidam." That means I have narrated this story according to what I saw and heard from my elders. At the end, he says, when I narrated this story, I followed the path of truth. After all this thing, we Zoroastrians came to India, came to Bombay. The Parsis started to migrate to Bombay from the beginning of the 18th century, from their once flourishing and well-established towns in the coastal Gujarat. In making of Bombay, the contribution of the Parsis is a unique historical phenomena, where an extremely small minority community like ours became the agent of social, economic, political, and cultural change. They were the innovators, they were the initiators, they were the catalysts of change for more than 200 years after their advent into Bombay in late 1600. The position and status thus achieved by the Parsis brought a sense of fulfillment and a strong identity. Western education, though we are highly educated, supposed to be the highly educated community in India, and the people used to say the Parsis are more Britishers than the Britishers themselves, and it's a fact of life. So Western education did not erase their sense of Indianness and Parsism. In fact, it has strengthened the sense of pride in achievements of the community, in the revival of the study of Zoroastrianism, in internal reforms and cultural developments. Now, if Parsis will cling to the traditions of advancing by merit and talent, by making themselves indispensable and work loyally for the nation, there is no way that they will disappear from this globe. Now, I'll just take only two. The challenge of the 21st century for the Parsi Iranis Orthosis is to maintain their ethnic identity and preserve, protect, and practice the precepts of the Zoroastrian faith so as to remain visible, forward-looking, and stand united as a community globally. Before I end my talk, let me quote two scholars. One, Professor John Hinnels, in his book, Introduction to Zoroastrianism, he mentions, and what he says, Iran has influenced a number of religions. To Hinduism and Buddhism, it is said to have given belief in the Savior to come. But to its Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which owe most to Zoroastrianism, because belief in devil, heaven and hell, end of the world, resurrections of the dead, and the final judgment, all these thoughts have been developed in Jewish, Christian, Muslim thought as a result of the Zoroastrian influence. And lastly, he says, perhaps no other religion has influenced so many people in so many continents over so many centuries. Dr. Dhalla, a very renowned Zoroastrian priest from Karachi, Pakistan, in his book on history of Zoroastrianism states, I have narrated the story from Iran to India, and now we are in America, another continent. Dr. Dhalla, he mentions 50, 60 years back, with the downfall of the empire, the hope of regaining power had disappeared forever. They could never see the vision of its restoration. History has recorded this one and the unique, pathetic instance of a great nation of millions being reduced to a small community of a little over 100,000 souls all told, still true to their ancient faith. Then he says, rulers of nations they have not become, but they have proved themselves to be the true bearers in the great name and the fame of the illustrious bearer. The pages of the national history are still thrilling with the noble deeds of the great ancients, Iranians, and their dutiful descendants have faithfully reflected their past national glory in the mirror of these small communities. And lastly, let the Parsis individually and his community collectively abide steadfast in the path of righteousness, and they will be practicing true Zoroastrianism. Zarathustra has been the hope of the Parsis in the past. So is he now, and so will he be forever. Ladies and gentlemen, my paper is over, but before that, I will just give a small talk about the Iranians. I have been told that Iranians are in good numbers over here. It's very good to see my co-religion is Iranians because they were they were in Iran for so many years. I had been going to Iran since last 10 years. Every year practically as a guide in a big tour, taking 250, 220 people every year. And we see those Iranians, they convert to Islam. But by looking at our dress, by looking at our pagri, by looking at our attire, they come to us. Are you from India? Yeah, I say yes. Are you Zartoshti? I say yes. Then without asking, without permission, they embrace us. And there are tears in their eyes. It is my experience. I am giving you my experience. I am not saying anything from the book. And I said, why are you crying? He said, our forefathers were Zartoshtis like you. In one photo studio I went, he told me to come inside, and he showed Bahman, Ardashir, Sharia, Naushirwan, so these are the photos. I am Muhammad. He showed me. It was very unfortunate. One of my friends, no, it is very hard to believe. We have got everything on our platter. After coming to India, we have not to fight any battle with Jari Rana. He gave us, yes, come and stay, like sugar in a mill. We have just poured sugar in the milk and we got the place to reside. We have not to fight for the place. That's why Parsis got everything on platter. That's why they don't realize the importance of the traditions and religion. If you are amidst the midst of other religious identities, if you were to live, it would have been very, very difficult. One of my friends in Iran, he's a convert, has to convert because they cannot maintain their identity, they cannot get ration. All these things, if I'll tell you, it take another one lecture. So his name was Hoshang. He met me constantly is meeting me every year. One day on the roadside, I told Hoshang what he did. He immediately put his hand on my mouth and said, Parvez, we are on the road, on the main road of Iran, in Tehran proper. Don't call me Hoshang. I am Hoshang inside my house. As soon as I step outside, I am Hussein. I had tears in my eyes. I salute those Iranians. I salute those Iranians who are practicing their religion in Iran. This is my open respect to them. He said, inside my house, I am Hoshang. Outside, I am Hussein. Really, it brings tears to my eyes now also. That is the way how they live. They cannot wear sudre. They cannot put on kusti. If they do all such things, they will not get their ID card. Their children will not get the admission in the school. The father will not get the job, public job in a bank or any public limited company. He has to do farming, he has to do driving or something like that. All these things are still there in 2014, they exist. So after all this persecution, what my intention of this paper is, our Zoroastrians were living in a very abject conditions in Iran, even after that our Parsis came to India. They still lived there, those Iranians. And they tried to preserve their religion in spite of all the hardship, in spite of all the troubles and tribulations. And in the last century, the Zoroastrians from India, you can see at the end of it, there are some slides at the 21st slide, 22nd slide at the end of it. I'll just show you, one gentleman was sent from India One gentleman from India was sent to Iran for amelioration of the conditions of the Zoroastrians, Iranians staying in Iran. Yes. The name of this gentleman was Manekji Limji Hoshang Hataria. The Kamas, the Wadiyas, the Pandays, they all get together and sent this young boy of 41. He was born in 1813, and he was sent as an emissary of that committee in 1854 to Iran to uplift the Iranians in Iran who were subjected to torture and all this, okay? So this was the man who relieved Iranians from the heavy jizya tax and all this. Even if you go today to Iran, in any Zoroastrian Iranian house, along the photo frame of Zarathustra, you will always find the photo frame of this gentleman, Manekji Limji Hoshang Hataria. Somebody even mentioned it earlier in the morning. So he was the man who relieved, who uplifted the Iranians from Iran. He built a school for the boys and girls and all these things. Thank you very much once again for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Is there any questions anybody has? You have, please. Would you like a mic or would you be talking loud enough? Okay.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I have two questions. One pertains to give us some historical perspective of the Yazidis. And the second question is, at what time in history did the issue of devas become a difference between the Indo-Iranians that came to India versus the Iranians that migrated? The first question which you asked about the Yazidis, what do you mean to say they are? Actually, yes. The Yazidis, we are reading in the newspaper, in the channels everywhere, the Yazidis have been mistreated, but they are not the followers of Zarathustra. They were not the followers of Zoroaster. In Iran, even if you go today, there are so many other minor sects which are living. Kurdish people are there, Yazidis are there. These people, they follow very few precepts from the Zoroastrian tradition, very one or two precepts, but they are not Zoroastrians per se. So they are the mountainous people of the mountainous region. Iran is a very vast country, it has so many mountains around, all the four sides connected with mountains. And Secondly, when the Indo-Aryans were living once upon a time near the North Pole, what I said, there was a migration from North Pole downwards to the south. At that time, the Indo-Iranian people, Indo-Aryans, they were living together. That's how they separated subsequently the Indo-Aryans and Indo-Iranians, Indo-Europeans. Even the European languages which are there, have their germination in the old Avesta and Sanskrit language. That's why our language, which is Avesta, our scriptures are written in a language which is known as Avesta. And it is being taught at the Bombay University. We teach them. It is written from like Persian from right to left. So there, that language was originally not there. Language was subsequently made. It was remade in 6th century. Our books are written in Avesta. That's why our scriptures are known as Zand Avesta. And in the olden days, when the Iranians and the Aryans were living at one place, they used to adore the shining things. Like we call the diva, the dev to shine. In Persian, in a Greek, dev means to shine, jhalakvo, prakash. So that was the word which was used. And when they separated, the one became the enemy of the other. Enemy in the sense that exactly to identify themselves, they have their own separation terms. So what we call is Ahura. That is our Lord of life, our divine entity. And they call their divine entity as Asura. Like in Hindi, we say Satya. Satya meaning truth, righteousness, right thing. Whereas in Sanskrit, in Avesta, it is called Hatya. Where Sa was there, Her has been written instead of Sa and Her. There are so many linguistic and slow, and because of these finer things, these two groups separated, and their identity became different, and that's how they were there.
Sorry, guys, we are running out of time and the next session is due. But there is the West Foyer. If anybody has questions, would like to talk more about this with Dasturji, kindly talk to him there. He'll be there after the session and any of your questions will be answered. So on behalf of all of you, I really want to thank Dasturji. That was a very, very enlightening speech. And we from India have always maintained that had it not been for the tolerance of the Hindus, our religion would never have survived there too. So we are very grateful there too to the Indians there. And thank you very much, all of you, for coming here and enjoying the talk. Next door, we have the Shahnama exhibition. In case you want to see that, it's just right next door, and just enjoy yourself. All the best to you and a Happy New Year. Thank you.